Hello, my dears, it's Katie, and it's time to wrap up October. I'm once again doing another vlog style wrap up thing because it's just easier, because then I can just do everything at once and give you all my thoughts on things right after I finish them rather than just try and remember everything at the end of the month. So, first things first, October has been rough for me. This roughness kind of started at the end of September, and it really kind of hit in October. I want to read, but nothing is holding my interest. So I ended up reading rereading a lot of my favorite fanfic, particularly Merthyr fanfic. It's just something that I go to give myself comfort, and it brings me joy and happiness, and I'm really glad that I did it. I was still reading alongside it, but a lot of the books that I was reading were just really not working for me. I did finish a book, and I'm super glad it's done because it was a book that I really was not enjoying, and because I didn't like it and because I had a hard time with it, I'm actually going to talk about it in a different way. I'm not going to really give you much detail as to kind of what it's about and do my normal breakdown. I'm going to do a lighter version of it because I just had a hard time with this book. So the book that I'm talking about is called Mage's Blood by David Hare. I read this not only because it was a book that I was interested in and actually was on my TBR for a period of time, but the book that was chosen for Cass's Big Ass Book Club, and I'll link that information down below as well as Cass's channel. You should definitely go check her out if you haven't already. But the Big Ass Book Club is basically what it sounds like. It is centered around big books, primarily fantasy books, but also some other genres as well. And Mage's Blood just happened to be the first pick, but as I said, I didn't like it that much, which I know is a fairly unpopular opinion. It just seems like such a well-liked book across the board for so many people, and I can't help but wonder if part of the reason I didn't like it was because of the mindset that I'm in, and that I might have liked it if I read it at a different time. But at the same time, there were certain things about the book that really, really didn't work for me. But before I tell you more of my thoughts on that, I should probably attempt to tell you what this book is about. This book takes place in a medieval kind of version of our own, only alternate universe like. There are cultures from the east and there are cultures from the west, and they are separated by a vast ocean, I guess. And every, I think it's 12 years, a bridge comes out of the water, or the water drains or something, and they have a bridge where the east and the west can be connected, and they can do trade, and they can, interact with each other. But, then the bridge, I guess, goes away again. And this is called The Moontide. So this book is heavily based on the Third Crusade. Like, there are so many cultures and so much, it's such a vast scope. So, I mean, like, that's really interesting because there's, not a lot of really great fantasy out there that, or even fantasy in general, that really tackles super diverse things and has a super diverse cast like this book was trying to do. Because as I said, we have a lot of things in the West, and it was very reminiscent of the Holy Roman Empire in a lot of ways. And then we also have the East, which is more of I'll call it like a Middle Eastern vibe. And I mean, it was, as I said, the world building, and that's really where this book shown for me. Like, the world building was actually pretty decent. I mean, it wasn't great because you couldn't absolutely tell that it was based on our real world, and you could also tell because the author didn't spend a ton of time trying to come up with unique names and whatever. Like, the names were unique enough, but if you really looked at them, you'd be like, oh yeah, okay, that's Europe. Like, Euros equals Europe. And things like that. Like, it was just very lazy world building, but decent world building, if that makes sense. And I actually enjoyed that aspect, and like the little pieces of the language that we got were also really great. But after the world building, everything else was not for me. I mean, the plot was okay because, as you can kind of tell, all of book one of this quartet is kind of the lead up to the Moontide, and just everything that is going on in all of these different places during that period of time, and all of these different plans and conspiracies and schemes and whatnot, was really interesting. But the execution of it wasn't great. And that kind of brings me to the writing. I really, really did not like the writing. I'm not even joking when I am saying that 98% of this book I was disconnected from. I didn't connect with the story. I tuned out and thought about other things while I was reading, which is part of the reason I don't feel like I can talk about this in depth or even talk about like names and stuff, because I just could not pay attention to the constant jumping around to different parts of the world. You expecting me, the reader, to follow what was going on. It really did not work. It was super disjointed, and maybe it's just me being me, but I did not have an easy time following this. And I read big, long, epic fantasy things on a regular basis, I might add. And I just did not connect. The writing was just very stilted and just not connecting, I guess is the best word I can give you. And then finally, talking a little bit about the characters. As I said, the characters were incredibly diverse, which I really liked. But the problem with attempting to write about as large of a scope as the author was trying to write about, it was too much, I think. And he had too many characters trying to tell the story. I'm pretty sure we had like at least 6 POV characters, or 6 characters I guess we were even following. And as I said, it was kind of too much, especially since some of the names were super similar. I'm like, wait, who are you again? And where are you from? And what is your story arc line thing again? Like, I just could not connect. And I don't want to toot my own horn, but like, I read this Silmarillion and had less of a difficult time reading that than I did reading this. And if you know anything about the Silmarillion, you'll know that that is a feat for me to even say, because the names and the places in that book are also quite vast, but it was written in a more coherent way, and I actually connected with the characters. But I really, as I was going back to Mage's Blood, I just really didn't connect with the characters. There were hints here and there where I did, and there was one character's storyline that I kind of started getting invested in about halfway through, and that is of Ramita. And Ramita is, I think she's from the East, but she's kind of got a very similar storyline to that of Dany from Game of Thrones, and that she is married off to a kind of higher up mage, and she finds out that, you know, her sole purpose in this marriage is to have this mage's kids for a whole slew of reasons. And I did end up connecting with her a little bit. I was at least interested in her storyline to an extent. And I thought that her arc was arguably the best written out of the lot. And just, I don't know, it just flowed the best, it made the most sense, and I enjoyed it. Everyone else's storylines that we were following, it was just all over the place. And I'm like, I don't even know what happened. Like, I would read my 2 chapters of the day, and then I would walk away from the book, and I would never think about it. I'd just be like, okay, I have to read my 2 chapters of the day. And then I would read my 2 chapters, and then I would be like, okay, I'm done. Don't know what happened, or I know very little of what happened. Bye. So I just had a really hard time. So, just to recap, I thought the world building was decent, and it was kind of the best part of the book. The plot was also okay. It was intriguing enough and, you know, interesting. But then when it comes to the writing and the characters, which is, the characters are usually what makes or breaks a story for me, it was severely lacking. It was definitely more of a plot-driven book, which I don't have an issue with. Sometimes plot-driven books can really be great for me if the world building is great. But when I say the world building has to be great, I mean, like, it has to be great. Really well done. And then another thing I should probably point out that I forgot to mention earlier is that this book quartet thing is primarily dealing with mages and different factions of mages. And that comes into play with the religion stuff. And it is very, very heavy on the religion things. I mean, as I said, it is incredibly reminiscent of the Third Crusade. I am not even remotely joking about that. If it's so similar to the Third Crusade. And I thought that was interesting, but at the same time it was like, you know, seeing all of the things. So yeah, this book, heavy on the political and religious themes. So if that's something that's really interesting to you, I'd say maybe give it a try, but be warned that even if it is something that you generally like, this book is written in such a way with such a vast cast and large scope that it might detract from your enjoyment, like it did for me. Because normally, I love religious themes and political intrigue in my books. Like, it's just really interesting for me, but it has to be done and explored through the characters rather than through the plot. And I just wasn't quite getting that here. But really disappointed in it, especially since I thought I was going to love it, but unfortunately, it really was not for me. So, I finished Qualify a few days ago, and I have a lot, and I mean a lot of thoughts on this book and the series. Qualify is the first book in the Atlantis Grail series by Vera Nazarian, and I'm going to preface it off by saying this book is objectively bad. Like, it's really not great in any facet. That being said, I did kind of get addicted to it, kind of being like, I started the second book already, and that was definitely not in the plan. Just to tell you a little bit about what this book is about, it is kind of one of those stories where, like, asteroid is coming towards Earth and is going to wipe out humanity, with a twist. The twist being that anyone from the ages of 9 and 18, I think it is, are allowed to participate in this qualification process so that they can go live on this other planet. And the qualification process is quite grueling. It starts off with like this preliminary round where everyone in that age range partakes in a test and some other exercises, activities, games, I guess you can call them, in order to determine whether or not they will actually be able to move on to the candidacy process of the whole ordeal. And then you go on and you, during this 4-week kind of boot camp kind of a thing, you take 4 classes. You have combat, agility, culture, and tech, and you can get points or demerits and things of that sort for yourself in order to kind of move on. So then you get to go into the semifinals, and then you partake in the finals, and things kind of go from there. And this story follows our main protagonist, Gwen, on this journey. Gwen is one of 4 siblings from the Lark family. They're kind of they all have G names. So there's George, who's the eldest. Then there's Gwen, who's one of the middle children. Then there's Gordy and Gracie. Yeah, it's frustrating. I can't stand that. And they all have like these cutesy little nicknames. They're called the 4Gs. Anyway, I digress. That's like the gist of the book. Follow Gwen's journey on this qualification process thingy. Now it's time to talk about each element separately. Okay, the writing is bad. Period. It's just really bad. Really bad. Okay, I am emphasizing that for a reason. Just if you choose to read this after I am done talking about it, know going in that the writing is terrible. And if that's something that really bothers you to the point where like I cannot deal, skip this. Because the pacing is really bad. And when I say really bad, like the first half of the book is 1 week. And then the next half is everything else. And it kind of starts to even itself out. In a way, it evens itself out. But it's very tolling because you like look at the book and then you get to like, let's say, as I said, about halfway point, and you look back and you're like, what's happened so far? Literally nothing. Just a whole bunch of information and random stuff. So yeah, the writing is just bad. So like, pacing aside, just some of the sentences you look at and you're like, okay, excuse me, what did you try and say? I am screaming inside. As I said, writing not great at all. Like random italics, random capitalization, switching tenses and things like that. And so you guys know I generally don't pay attention to the writing when I'm reading a book. Like when I'm talking about and doing a review of something at the end, I oftentimes say, yeah, writing, whatever, I don't care. Here it is impossible not to pay attention to the writing because of the writing. Like it sucks you out of the story. It is something that is so noticeable that you can't look past it for the most part. Next up is the characters. The characters are also very flat. There is little to no character development whatsoever for anybody. Ask me who my favorite character is, and I mean, I have sort of one, but at the same time, I also really dislike this character. It's a complicated situation. Like, I don't like anybody, and I mean anybody, in this book and in this series. Nobody's likable. Everyone's really annoying, and I scream every time. So I guess I'll talk a little bit about Gwen first, and she is our protagonist. So Gwen is our protagonist, and she's good at everything, but she's also stupid in literally every sense of the word. Not joking. She's dumb. Some other people have described it as like self-deprecation, but really it's just that she's stupid. And just everything is convenient for her. Everything that happens in the book happens because of, to further Gwen's story. Like even the other characters, like they solely exist to further Gwen's storyline. And because of that, it's frustrating. Like the pacing issues and just the way it's written, weeks could go by and we haven't seen a character and then they just pop up again. No mention of where they were, what happened to them in the time that we had, and they just show up and like, hey, here I am. It's like, okay, that's fine. I haven't seen you in several hundred pages, but welcome back, I suppose. So yeah, Gwen, as I said, she's a Mary Sue. Like I hate that phrase, but like it fits her perfectly. Because like even for as dumb of a character as she is, she's often described as a nerd. And everyone's like, oh my god, you're so brilliant, and you can figure out this thing. And my favorite part of all of this is she will get herself into some trouble, or a conflict thing will happen. And she's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle this thing. 2 pages later, it's like, oh, I have an idea. Like, this is going to resolve my whole problem or whatever. I'm like, oh, okay, sure. Okay, sure, Gwen. Yeah, okay, this is really plausible. I'm so glad that you figured out the solution just in 30 seconds of panicking and freaking out. I just cannot deal. Cannot deal. And yeah, great. So yeah, Gwen is a very, very frustrating character, and there is no likable, redeeming qualities to her whatsoever. Okay, great. Then there are the 2 main male love interests, I guess. First one being Logan, Gwen's crush of 3 years. She's literally obsessed with him. It's uncomfortable. And they end up at the same qualification center, and they officially meet, kind of a thing. Their relationship is not ideal. And then there's the other love interest, who is Aeson Cass. And Aeson is an interesting fellow. He is an Atlantean, and he is a really elite pilot from Atlantis. I mean, and there's obviously more to him than you originally think there is. But we don't find that out until the very end of Qualify. And I'm not going to tell you what he is and what his story is, because we don't find out half of it. Or any of it, really. We just find out that he's more than you think he is, kind of a thing. It's a mess. It's a mess. But Aeson is this, like, he's just literally Whiplash in human form. 1 second, he is angry and cold and mean and unfeeling. Period. And then the next second, he is calm and has a little bit of empathy and a tiny bit of softness to him. but he's also controlling. And their relationship thingy is also sort of unhealthy, at least at this point, because their interactions are weird and limited and just uncomfortable, frankly. Just everything about that triangle thing. I don't even want to call it a love triangle because I'm not entirely sure if that's what it is, even though it kind of is a love triangle between Gwen, Aeson, and Logan. It's a triangle, but like, is it a triangle? I don't know. Everyone loves Gwen, basically. Everyone loves her. Except for, the quote alpha group, which is some, female hatred thing that's going on. I don't even know. This book is a walking trope, or yeah, literally walking trope universe. There you go. Like, that's the best way to describe it. So yeah, those are the main. I don't even want to call them the main characters because they're like not. Gwen is literally the main character because it's a first person perspective, and literally everything happens because of her. She gets herself into all kinds of dumb trouble, and it's like, you're really stupid. But also like weirdly relatable in some ways. It's complicated. And then we have her 3 siblings. George is the eldest, and he's also really smart and good at things, but he's like also nerdy. I don't know. They're all kind of classified as nerdy musical people because music does play a big role in things, and I'll touch on that in a minute or two because it's kind of plotty-ish. I don't know. The sibling relationship is interesting, but also like frustrating, and I don't know. It's not well done personally. But as I said, like everything is a walking trope in this book. Every single person you come across in these books are a freaking walking trope. So despite all of the characters being the way that I said, it's a fairly diverse cast because there are a lot of, I don't want to say a lot, but there's like disability rep, there's a bunch of POCs, just a whole slew of things. However, just because there is representation does not mean it is good representation, because every single person in these books are walking stereotypes in general. As I said, there's a disabled character. Very, very stereotyped. Also pitied, and just, it's uncomfortable. There is a black best friend thing, and she's also a walking stereotype. There's some Native American rep, walking stereotype. It's interesting, I should say. I don't know. It's something, and I don't know what it is. But now, I suppose I should move on to the actual plot. So as I mentioned before, this is a futuristic asteroid is going to hit Earth and destroy it storyline with a twist in that people aged 9 to 18 are able to participate in these kind of like trials, games, competition thingy in order to qualify to get aboard the ship and go to this place called Atlantis. And as I mentioned, the process is grueling and brutal. Quote. So we have, like, literally the entire book is about getting to Atlantis. So we follow Gwen and crew as they go from initial school test day, where they are taking the written test and doing all of the other activities and games and things in order to determine if they will be able to even move on to like past the preliminary stage. And that was, kind of interesting. I liked getting to see the preliminary process, because it actually reminded me a lot of, like, you know, my experiences getting tested for accommodation stuff. Like, a lot of the tests that were being described is very reminiscent of that, so I thought that was really interesting. And then after preliminary, it's kind of like military boot camp. So as I mentioned, there are 4 classes that they have to take. There's agility, combat, tech, and culture. And a lot of them are self-explanatory. Combat literally is like it sounds. It's like martial arts, hand-to-hand combat, fighting stuff. But there's, more to it than that. There's, like, depending on which quadrant you get placed into, because there are 4. There's red, green, yellow, and blue. Surprise. And each quadrant represents something and has only their own, like, unique things. So it's kind of like Hogwarts houses, only, like, the super light version, and for science fiction rather than fantasy magic things. Agility is like running and things of that sort. Running and monkey bars, like basically gym class. Then there's culture, which is like Atlantis history, which I wish we got more of, at least in Qualify. I don't know if we get more of it later, but I really liked the little bit that we got of culture. And then finally there is tech, and tech is actually in some way the most important class. Even though they claim all of them are important, I would argue that tech is the most important because of the stuff that they learn and the materials that they are learning with. So there is this metal called orichalcum, and basically what that metal is, it is a tonal based metal. So basically you sing. Like, that's literally tech. All of their tech is controlled by singing, different sequences and melodies and things of that sort. And each of the quadrants have their own kind of key. And there's a really, really interesting singing storyline that is attached to this book and Gwen's storyline. And I'm not going to say anything about that because that's something that you should experience yourself. But yes, I kind of liked that aspect. Those are like that's like the main storyline. And then there are some, as I said, romantic subplots. Like, there's the romantic subplot between Gwen and Logan, which is just super uncomfortable. And then there's kind of hinting of a romance, sort of, between Gwen and Aeson. They're like the epitome of hate to love. Like, just they are. Whereas, like, Logan and Gwen, I don't know exactly what trope they fall into, but they're like, I guess it's like the nerd and the jock or some shit. I don't even know, dude. But it's something. And as I said, the relationships, friendships, etc. are not the healthiest. So just keep that in mind also going in. Which is another reason why I really should not like this book in this series. Just the relationships are incredibly unhealthy in every facet and sense of the word. Anyway, I've talked enough about the plot. Now, finally, the world building. The world building is honestly where this book kind of shines. It's the most interesting part, and in some ways the best part of the book. It takes a very tired plot line and kind of turns it on its head a little bit. But the whole quadrant slash house slash whatever you want to call it, group thing is, also a tired thing. And she did a few unique things with it, but like, I didn't find it to be anything special. The thing that was really intriguing the most was just the 4 classes and how they tie into Atlantean life and whatnot. I just really liked learning, as I said, the very, very tiny bit that we learned about Atlantis in the book. I don't know. It was just really interesting and really intriguing, and I wanted to know more. That might be why I liked it, but at the same time, who the hell knows? Who the hell knows? My friend did say, like, end of Qualify is a good stopping place if you want a break. If you read Compete, you won't. It's not a good stopping place. Read Win. So I have now committed myself to finishing all the books in the series that are currently out, because Survive is not out yet. That's a problem. That's a problem. I mean, I haven't gotten to Win yet, and Win is almost 1,000 pages long, but like, I have a feeling I'm going to get through it fairly quickly. But anyway, I'm now addicted to the series that I objectively shouldn't like because it's bad. It's not good. So I'm like still constantly sitting there being like, why do I like this? Why am I enjoying this book that I really shouldn't enjoy? Because it is problematic and it's just not well done, not well written or anything. It's wild, frankly. And currently, as I'm making this video, I'm almost halfway through Compete. Yeah, that's where we're at on this. This is very long, but I needed to explain this. And since it's not a book that is known on Booktube at all, literally at all, I have felt the need to do this in a longer way, because while it is not great, it is something that I think a lot of people could enjoy. I mean, as I said, it's literally book candy in that, like, go into it, don't think about anything, just read it. Don't expect it to be your new favorite thing, or if it's your new favorite thing, it'll be kind of like me, I'm guessing. If you're a critical reader, like, just do not analyze, do not critically read this book. It is purely for enjoyment. Just please don't pull it apart, because you will drive yourself nuts. But anyway, let me know if you guys are planning on picking it up at any point, and please come and talk to me, because like currently I only have one person to talk to about this series, and if you're willing to power your way through a hell of a lot of pages to talk about it with me, all power to you, and I would really appreciate it. So remember the last portion of the video that I was talking to you guys, and I was talking about Qualify, and I told you I was, about halfway through Compete? Yeah, so I just finished it last night, and I have no regrets. Oh my god. So that's the second book in the Atlantis Grail series that I finished. I now only have Win left because, Survive isn't out. But just because I talked at great length about Qualify earlier in the video, I'm not going to go into too much detail on Compete, but Compete literally picks up right where Qualify left off. So, I mean, I won't say much, but, it's post-qualification. A lot of people made it through and are now on the shuttle that is taking them to Atlantis. And while they're on the shuttle, they're going to be on there for a year. And they had to make a choice as to whether or not they wanted to be a civilian or they wanted to be a cadet. And depending on the track that they're taking will depend on the story that we embark on. But our protagonist decides to go on a bit of a different track because of a lot of reasons. And so we get glimpses of all kinds of things. And And it was kind of fun because, I mean, we did get to see some new classes besides the old ones. We also got to see pilot training. And Gwen ends up in pilot class. And that's, fascinating. Um, and just, it's kind of like, as I said, it's literally just kind of picking up where book one left off. And it spans another year, and we get to kind of start to get a tiny little bit more of Atlantean culture and life. Not quite in the way that you would expect, but yes. And also, there is a love triangle in this one. It's very tiny-ish, but there is a love triangle. It's between the characters that I mentioned, earlier in the video. Um, and yeah, it was just a ride. It was a ride. I had a really good time with Compete. No going in. Like, it's same caliber as Qualify. Like, not good in any respect. Like, it was just not good. So yeah, there was this one scene that, like, it was the most awkward and uncomfortable thing I have arguably ever read. And I've read a lot of awkward and uncomfortable things in my life, but this one kind of took the cake. It was an almost, I want to call it almost like borderline sexual assaulty, but at the same time, it was consensual, but neither of them knew that it was consensual, but it was like also not a sexual encounter. Let me just try and explain this to you. So they were in confined quarters for a reason, and they ended up having to be kind of like harnessed together for a safety thing. And then it was just kind of like a really awkward and uncomfortable situation with, being in close proximity and them both liking each other. And so there were some arousal things and awkward touching. And it was very uncomfortable, and the way it was written was just. It should not have been funny. It should have been, like, horrifying, and it was both at the same time. And I was also really mad too, but I was mostly laughing and screaming because of how uncomfortable and awkward it was. And I'm doing a terrible job of explaining it, but that's because the author does a terrible job of explaining it. If you want more context, feel free to DM me. I have no qualms about spoiling this specific thing, but that is if any of you are going to read this series, which might not happen because it's, as I said repeatedly, it's not great, it's weird, and it's just not well known by like anybody. But yeah, arguably the most uncomfortable and awkward thing of the entire series. Great. And then there was just a lot more implausible things that you're just like, why is this happening? Or like, is she just really that dumb, or is she doing this for X, Y, and Z? And it's both. The answer is it's both. Gwen is one of those characters who's like, it's only, like, she's only good at stuff for the sake of plot. All the other times she is dumb. And so, yeah. And then it, of course, ended on a cliffhanger. Another weird cliffhanger that just kind of like sort of came out of nowhere. I mean, like, I saw it coming, but at the same time, I wasn't expecting it to be like that. It's fine. It's fine. I am having a weird blast with this series, and I will be starting Win soon. But yeah, just all of the same things that I said about Qualify apply to Compete, but in some ways, the things that were annoying and frustrating in Qualify were kind of exacerbated in Compete just a little bit. It was more heavy on the romance stuff, which, is fine. But I would have loved to have certain more of certain parts of pilot class. Like, I just really liked pilot class. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to talk about the series. I just don't. Because, as I said, it is like literally book candy. And I hate that I love this series. So, for me to try and explain anything to you guys is difficult because it's like, wow, I love this, but I should not love this. And it just kept getting worse and worse throughout reading Compete because it was just like, why do I love this series? Why am I reading this? This is terrible. But at the same time, I'm highly entertained. But then there was like this dance. Well, there were multiple dances, but one of my, like, towards the end, there was a dance, and I was like, now this chapter right here, this is one of my sweet spots. So I was kind of like garbage for that specific scene. I'm like, yes, Katie is a fan of this. Like, let's have more of this. Not that it's well written, but like, I want more of this. So we'll see what happens and when, because they have gotten to Atlantis now. And we'll see where it goes, because I have a feeling that it's not going to go in a direction that I am expecting it to go into. So, um, we'll see. So, I just finished The Picture of Dorian Gray on Halloween, right before it changed. It's great. I had a really great time reading that book. I actually really, really liked that book a whole hell of a lot. It could be argued that that book was my favorite book of the month, but you know, qualify and compete are, my book candy books, and even though they are objectively not the best, I still really liked them. But The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde was a great book, and I'm so glad that I deemed it to be spooky enough to read it for October because it was great. For those of you who don't know what The Picture of Dorian Gray is about, it follows the story of these three men in particular. There's Dorian, Basil, and Henry. And basically, Basil is an artist, Dorian is the subject of the painting, and Henry is just another acquaintance of the two of them. But Basil draws Dorian. He's obsessed with Dorian, actually, and he ends up drawing him and, well, painting him, I should say. And that painting is, you know, the picture of Dorian Gray. And what ends up happening is they're all sitting around just talking about life and talking about the painting and everything. And Henry gives Dorian a book. And in that book is, I guess, it's a book of like superstitious things and whatnot. And there is I don't know if I would call it a spell or a wish or what exactly it is, but basically Dorian kind of sells his soul to the devil in order to stay young because, that was the wish of all of them. And so basically what ends up happening is Dorian the man stays young, and the picture that was painted of Dorian grows old. And it's kind of a metaphor for all of the bad things that Dorian ends up doing kind of get reflected in that painting. And the only way that he can die is if the painting is destroyed, basically. And it's such a well done book. So, I mean, the writing is obviously incredible. It is so well done. It's so flowery and so intricate and so in depth and meaningful in so many ways. It was one of my favorite parts of the book, and I mean, I say this literally every video and every clip, but you guys know I don't tend to pay super close attention to the writing unless it stands out in one way or another. Well, this writing stood out. It just had a lot to it, and it's something that I absolutely loved. The plot was intriguing enough. It's just kind of it's very philosophical. So a lot of it is just having philosophical discussions between the characters and things, but it is also following Dorian's life and his transformation from this young, carefree, naive young man to this still young in looks, angry, vile, evil, cruel person, and just kind of how that changes that, inside you can change while your outside doesn't, based on the experiences that you have and the people that you talk about and the conversations that you have and everything. It was just fascinating. I don't know if you guys know this about me, but I love philosophy. It's a subject matter that really, really interests me and is not something that I have gotten a huge chance to explore. I took a couple, like a course or two in college on philosophy, and I talked to my mom about it a lot because she also was really into the philosophy thing, and in some ways my dad was too. So we just have a lot of discussions, and I have had a lot of discussions with certain friends of mine about philosophical topics and things. So it's just something that I enjoy. So whenever it pops up in books, it's something that I really tend to like. And this book is, I think, philosophical fiction or something funky like that, but I really liked it. And then the world, it's not really much to it. It takes place in, what is it, Victorian era? I don't actually know the year. It's irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, but somewhere around that period of time in England slash Paris, etc. Primarily England. And, as I said, irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, but well written for the events that did make it into the book. And then finally, talking about the characters. I mean, this is a very, very character centric book. So I don't want to say I liked the characters, but I found them absolutely fascinating. There was so much to them, and we got depth in one way or another, and I just really, really liked seeing the dynamic between the three main characters, Henry, Dorian, and Basil. For some reason, I particularly liked the interactions between Basil and Dorian, which, might surprise some people based on the, events that happen. But I loved that dynamic in particular. Henry was great when it was all three of them, but whenever he was just interacting with one or the other, I kind of found him a little bit irritating, but like at the same time, I still liked him. I didn't like pretty much any of the other characters though. They just were kind of insignificant in the grand scheme of things. I mean, they obviously had a purpose to further the story and further Dorian's, life. But overall, they weren't as explored as some of the others. So, yeah. I mean, as I said, the story is about Dorian. And I just loved getting to see his transformation and just him dealing with all of the things that he'd done and experienced throughout his life. It was just fascinating and interesting, as I said. Just the themes and the topics that were discussed in this book were really interesting. And if you guys have read this book at all in any way, shape, or form, please come talk to me about it because it's definitely one that you should be talked about. But those are all of the books that I read in October. There were only 4 of them, so just to recap, I read Mage's Blood by David Hare. Didn't really like it that much. It was not great. Then I read both Qualify and Compete, which are the first two books in the Atlantis Grail series by Vera Nazarian, and they are my book candy and my latest obsession. And I only have one person to talk to about these books because literally no one else I know knows about them. I've never seen them talked about on Booktube, and frankly, I'm not super surprised by that. They're not a super popular series since they're self published and primarily out on Amazon, I think. I don't know if they're elsewhere. I've never looked. Um, but my book candy, love them and hate them at the same time. And then finally, I read The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and I absolutely loved that book. In terms of other life things, I should mention that earlier this month, I found out that I passed the bar. So that means I get to be an attorney, and I'm very excited about that. I was terrified I wasn't going to pass on my first try, but somehow I managed to pull it off, and I don't know how. But that means I get to be sworn in to the Illinois bar, and then I get to start practicing law, and that's terrifying. Other than that, I went on a trip earlier this month to Oregon with one of my college friends, and I had a really good time. This is actually with the friend who got me into the Realm of the Elderlings, and who also just happened to, introduce me to the Atlantis Grail series. So yeah, she's winning on the book recommendations with me. And I should hopefully have a vlog of that trip going up soonish. But other than that, not much happened this month. I mean, besides, work chaos, which is always a lot. That's pretty much what I've got for you guys today. I'd be curious to know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. Definitely come talk to me about them down below. Or if you haven't read them but are planning on reading them, tell me that too. But other than that, you guys know the drill. I have all of my social media links down below. I have both my Twitter and Goodreads linked, as well as my Ships and Fandoms page. And I will catch you later in another video for you guys again soon. Bye!